This is a Klann-Linkage leg, and basically the idea is that it converts just rotary motion to leg motion. I'll show you how it works. We'll turn this round and go the other way. So this is the walking bit where the foot is on the ground. So if you can imagine the ground is along the bottom here, you can see it goes in very nearly a straight line. And then it picks up the leg, the foot, reaches out, puts the foot down, and then comes back along a very nearly straight line, and so on and so on and so on. So this is the Klann-Linkage leg, and the idea here obviously is that because it picks the leg up, then you can put it down on surfaces that are much taller than you might be able to get over with a small wheel. So the idea is this is a walking one rather than a wheeled one. And because it's all driven off one rotor here, then you can build the other legs off the same drive. So essentially you can have all of your legs working off one motor. Of course that makes steering impossible, but anyway. Okay, and then that's quite a smooth thing. So what we're going to do is we're going to build this out of Meccano. I'll do it again in Lego just to sort of see how it all works. Because one of the things I found quite tricky about watching the videos about it was I didn't really get a feel of what difference it would make with different lengths in each of these things. There are simulators for that, but really you just want to get a feel. So there are things like, for example, be able to make sure that there's enough clearance here. So when we look at it from the top down, you need to make sure that you've got the right kind of, some of this is a bit bent, obviously it's an old kit, but to make sure that you've got all the right clearances in place so that things don't get caught up on each other. And in this particular example, again, I put some legs on it just so that I can turn the handle at the back without getting in the way of the mechanism. Okay, and this is it walking in the opposite direction. So again, straight line away, pick up the leg comes back, gets put down, straight line away. So I start with the box because what we want to do is to have some kind of stability with the axles, really. That's all it is for. So when we're putting an axle in there, it's not rattling around on one side. It's got some kind of end-to-end hold to it. Now, to make a box rigid, you can't really just put a straight line between each of them because the whole thing will then work like a trapezoid. It'll shift around left to right. So what you do instead is you have something a bit like this, where you have some diagonals and then you've got diagonals in the opposite direction. And that's all this is for, is to try and make sure it's reasonably solid. Okay, so the diagram for a Klann linkage essentially has the driving crank in one location, the immediate supporting cam, the link for that should be down and to the left, and then up here somewhere is the sort of upper shoulder, if you like, the bit that supports the up and down movement of the foot. So basically I'm just going to pick reasonably randomly some holes for doing that. So all these things are all variable, and you can put, in fact, they don't even need to be sort of below. You could have, I've found that you could have the driving crank here and the backwards forwards crank here. But what we're really wanting to do here is to have the crankshaft pulling the leg up and down. So you've got this kind of motion on the crankshaft. And so just to make it easier, if you like, to feel around it, makes it much more sense to have the pivot point further down here. So I'm going to do that. Now, the other thing I wanted to do here was to use one of these little things rather than the crankshaft. And the reason was the crankshaft's quite long, and it means that they stick at the back somewhere, and when you move them around, it can be a bit of a pain. So this is quite a nice little way of doing it. So this is the driving crankshaft. So, sorry, I beg your pardon. This is the driving crank. And I wanted it to be a bit longer than the size of the wheel, so that's why I've bolted this extra length onto it. And obviously if I wanted this to be double-sided, then I need to build to come back to that later. Okay, now when we put this in, we don't want it to go all the way through, because as it goes round and round, the joint on here needs to go over the top of this, so we need to put it back so that it doesn't protrude. And even then, ideally, you would want to have the screws a bit less protruding, but we'll deal with that in a separate way. But that means we need something here that will hold this, stop it from popping backwards and forwards. So, oops, pop in one of these little studs. Pop that on the end so that it's just up to the end there. Tighten up this one. He says, grub screw that. But that's not a good sign. Is that a good sign? Oh, that's not a good sign. What's going on there? I bought these grub screws from somewhere. And that looks like it's reamed out the inside of that one. Something's gone fat. Oops. Clumsy fat fingers here, of course. The irritating continuous problem with Meccano is you need to have steady hands. My hands are no longer as steady as I'd like them to be. Okay. I prefer grub screws because they don't stick out horribly like this, but when you're doing Meccano, it shouldn't really matter that much. No, that's not good either. Okay, so right here we just have a shaft with a crank on the end of it. Very exciting there. So one of the things I would like to be able to do, for example, later is to put a motor on this, but we will see what we shall see. I think by that stage I want to be able to be looking at doing 3 or 4, I don't know if it's 4 or 8 legs at that stage. Okay, so the next stage then is to put the, is to mount the, I don't know what you want to call it, the thingy connector. And here we hit the classic problem of Meccano, really, is how do we go about, connecting things together, or connecting linkages together. Now, for this one, we need this piece to stand off that enough so that as it goes around, it clears these screws. Okay, so it needs to have some kind of separation there, or it'll just clonk up against the screws. So these are the kind of little push fit things. I'm humming and hawing about this now though, because I want to try and keep it reasonably consistent. So what I might do is to put one of these in. So there are also these little things which are quite interesting. So these are, they've got a screw on one end and then like a little piece of this axle on the other end. And it means you could do axly things with it. And I think actually this might be the best way of doing it. So we fasten this to here. Okay, so now we've got a spigot to attach things to, and we'll just put a bit of separator in there. Doesn't actually matter what the separator is, but that's now too short, I think, to put a clip on the top. Let's try and see. I think maybe just something a bit narrower. Even just given that's already a little bit proud, it might just be a couple of washers will be sufficient. Pop a couple of washers on. Okay. And now what we need is to either one of those or one of these. Well, actually, I'm going to put the other one on because I think it'll keep it flatter. In fact, it's tempting to put on something like this, which will keep it even more flat. And the washer's underneath. There's no point making something at the top that's flat at the bottom, but it's not going to. Keep it that way. Okay. So now the thing to watch for here is that this piece is stuck to this piece. So this brass piece here is obviously going to rotate with this rather than with this. So there's going to be a little bit of a friction bit underneath there. So I could possibly put a washer on the other side there, but I think in this particular case we're not going to get too concerned. It's only a prototype. Right, okay, so this gives us this kind of motion. Ooh, so this gives us this kind of motion. Yep. And what we want to do now is to have something that's doing roughly what my fingers are doing. Now we won't have a slide on it, but we can have something that's connected to it that basically does that. So it's basically just connected between that and another piece down here. And then we'll give it an even motion. Right? So this doesn't mean this is doing something even. It means that you get a slight variation in the angle at which things happen because because the connecting rod itself is going to be changing its angle, as I shall demonstrate. Right. So again, you want the same sort of thing. You can have a thing through the middle there. It's going to be connected at one end in order to make sure that it doesn't fall out. And at the other end, we'll pop this and we'll keep it reasonably low there so that it doesn't interfere with movement. So we'll pop a little thing on the top. Again, if we pop one of these on, it'll help to keep it reasonably flat. Okay, so now we want the same kind of thing here. We want to bind these two together. Now you can see here that these two are pretty much on the same level. That is to say that they're the same height above this box thing. So we want to make sure that this thing has the suitable separator here that's roughly equivalent to that one there, so that it doesn't so we're not twisting and bending it unnecessarily. In fact, we could just do the same kind of thing. All we need is one of those. That is to say, one of these and some washers. Where have I put this? Okay, so again, we're going to bolt this to this firmly. Okay, so there we have that. We can pop that roughly in the middle to start with. We'll pop a little spacer in. That's too big a spacer, we'll just pop some washers in. And then pop down top. Just before we do, we'll just check and make sure that it turns okay, and it doesn't. As you can see there, there's just jamming on that a bit. So for the moment, we're going to move it over here. Let's try that. Okay. Right, yeah, we'll pop this on properly. Okay, you can start to see how the motion starts to work here. So there's the crank going round and round and round, and I control it from the other side, not as evenly as it possibly could. And so you can see the end of this bit here has that up, reach, drag back, up, reach, drag back, up, reach, drag back. And so what we want to do now basically is transform that into we want to be able to basically move this position here down below the device that we're moving. So that motion, that sort of along, pull back, up, along, move, pull back. And what we want to do is basically say, okay, I want the motion that hole makes there needs to be happening down here now, because obviously there's no point in dragging back here. Yeah. And so the way we could do that, there's lots of ways of doing it, but we also want the motion to be down rather than that way. So one of the things we could do, for example, is just to pin something between this and something up here, but because this is making motions that goes towards that and away from that, that's not going to work. We need to have something flexible up here, so that's why we have that extra shoulder joint. So let's pop that on. Have I used? Okay, and we're going to pop that roughly at the top. If we make it too far over, there's some danger it's going to get locked up, jammed up, but I think actually, according to the diagrams, it's usually set back a little bit. And if it's set back too far, then it can't reach out, can't stretch out. So I'm probably going to be okay, and then we can just fit. So this stuff's filthy. Now again, so looking at it from this angle, you can see that the foot, if it's going to be connected to this, needs to be sort of 2 spaces higher than this. So I think what we'll do is we'll make it 1 space higher here and 1 space higher there, and that should do the job. We just have to do hook out to hold tight. Okay, and again, haven't really worked out what this should be, but I think it's going to be about roughly half that height-ish. We'll have a look and see. Try and see. So we'll just use a little temporary clip for the moment. So here again, hit the same problem again. We've got to put 2 linkages on. Here, I'm just going to use a short stubby axle and another short stubby axle. There's 2 possible short stubby axles. There's actually on each side here. So we'll bottom of those. Okay, so there's 1 on the bottom, 1 there, and then we need 1 on the top to hold it all together. Okay, and there's a joint I left in, or me. Okay, and we'll just pop a top on. We'll just pop a okay, now it's a bit sort of shaky here, partly because we've got these loose bits in there, but basically you can see now, again, same sort of thing. We've got the pull back, the lift leg, the step out, put foot down, reach back, walk back, okay, lift leg, reach out, so on. And you can see here, some of the issues that you can have with things that are nearly binding, not quite. Yeah, okay. Okay, so there we go. So that's basically the leg done in Meccano. I think some of the things to think about here are keeping your axles rigid, because this can get very flimsy if the original pieces here are also flimsy. You can see how this makes a big difference. If we put a proper little screwed thing on this one, and particularly something that's got a big wide flange, even that just makes an immense difference. We're still a prototype, obviously, but there's less sort of faffing about. So first things first, it's always handy having a box when you put axles together. It just makes the thing more rigid, and that also means that it's much easier to feel when things are going wrong. The other thing then is just to experiment with all the different sort of holes here. Now, the problem with Meccano, as with all lots of other things, is there's no real fine adjustment here. You can either be here or here, and if you're here, then it'll bind with this. So there's some things, it's already quite close there. You can see if this was attached to that hole, this doesn't work. And sometimes if you go at one stop too far, and it has massive consequences. So it's sufficiently good to experiment with. It shows how the thing works, and you can feel when you are experimenting with it what motions, what systems feel mechanically stressed as opposed to relaxed. So this one's quite relaxed. I mean, there's definitely a bit of especially not the binding, but anyway. Especially when it reaches out, there's definite sudden motion. So you get that thing where a little bit of motion, which requires a lot of force to push out a lot of material, and then when it slowly comes back, that's much more gentle, and the lift is very gentle. There's a lot of motion here just to move the leg just a little bit, and then there's that sort of woof out again. So up, and then woof out. Okay, and you might well find then that if you're adjusting this or adjusting this so that you get more motion. So for example, you might want to move this back one, so that it gets a much higher motion. That might be bollocks, actually. Yeah, okay, so moving this way and that way is what gives you more leverage, essentially, not more leverage, but more motion at this side. And you can feel sometimes when things are starting to get a bit stressed there that you're having to make a lot of effort to turn the wheel when you probably shouldn't. I am just going to move. That's just irritating. Let's just pop this one further over so that it's not binding like that, and let's see what sort of difference that makes to the motion. Okay, so now the leg is much more vertical. Well, not much more vertical. It's a bit more vertical. But otherwise, I don't think there's a significant amount of difference to the motion. And there we go. It's feels quite nice, actually. Once you've got this sort of idea about what it's doing, it's going out, reach out, walk back, pick up, step forward, put down, reach back. That's quite a nice motion. So the next phase is to do either driven one of these with 4 legs, because I think if you have wide enough feet, then you can do this with 4 legs, or to do it in Lego. Not sure doing it in Lego is going to help very much, but it might be interesting to see how Lego compares with this. So these sort of joints I don't like. I think there must be a nicer way of doing this, whereas Lego comes with various joints. And the other thing is that these don't always have to be straight. So for example, the Klann one has this one at an angle, so it comes down like this, so that the foot's much more vertical rather than reaching out and sticking out like this. It's basically sticking straight down more often. And then this one also is at an angle, which probably means something.